Shalom. Throughout our studies in this book of Vayikra, Leviticus, we've been learning about holiness. We've consistently been called upon to lead lives of holiness. That call informs every aspect of our lives, encompassing every thought, every word and deed, every striving for better, every small act of self-control and empathy for others, every relationship, every act of caring for this world. The call to holiness is a call to welcome Hashem's presence into this world. And Israel's task is to reveal that presence to all humanity. We live our lives centered around it and dedicated to it, remaining focused on His presence and at the same time, remaining super sensitive to everyone around us. That's what the tabernacle is actually all about. So Vayikra's commandments are broadcasting this urgent call for us to constantly engage in uplifting the human spirit, which is the godly soul within us, to separate it from our inherent parallel animal nature, and to prevent our spirit from descending into the dark abyss of confusion. So we constantly engage in refining and repairing the divine image in which we've been created. All this is the message and goal of this whole book of Vayikra, the reinstatement of this divine image and the validation of the purity of man's spiritual essence through the constant renewal of his connection to God. This week's Torah portion in the land of Israel is Parashat Behar, beginning in Leviticus chapter 25, while Parashat Emor will be read in the diaspora. The portion of Behar opens with a commandment to observe the 7-year cycle of Shemitah, the sabbatical year. 7 of these sabbatical years brings us to the 50th year, the Yovel, the Jubilee year, the year of freedom. During the sabbatical year, the land is not to be worked. The land itself is to observe a Shabbat. Thus we learn in our Parsha, Hashem spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, the land shall observe a Sabbath rest for Hashem. For 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard, and you may gather in your crop. But the 7th year shall be a complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for Hashem. Your field you shall not sow, and your vineyard you shall not prune." The very first verse of this portion of Behar tells us that this commandment of Shemitah was given Behar Sinai, at Mount Sinai, hence the Parsha's name. This expression of Hashem spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai is unusual. Rashi famously expresses the question of our sages and asks, why is this commandment of Shemitah singled out by Torah here as having been given at Mount Sinai? Why do we need to be told that regarding the sabbatical year when we already know that all of the commandments were given at Mount Sinai? He answers that just as this commandment, with all its many complex details, was revealed by God Himself at the Sinai revelation, so too all the commandments were given directly by God at Sinai. But the question remains, why does the Torah choose this mitzvah of Shemitah as the example to demonstrate this principle that all of the mitzvot were revealed by the same divine source at Mount Sinai, when it could have been taught the same lesson through any of them? So open up your heart. The deep lesson here is that the concept of the sabbatical year represents the essence of what giving the Torah at Mount Sinai really means. The Sinai revelation is the greatest encounter between the Almighty and man that ever took place. It's the basis of our entire grip on reality in God's world, and the experience was so profound that it set perpetual waves of energy into motion that ripple and resound in every generation. So really, on the deepest level, it was not a one-time experience, but it was more like switching on a spiritual perpetual motion machine. Torah's goal, listen carefully, is for the nation of Israel's everyday life in her land to be a continuation of that level of knowledge and revelation. The sabbatical year is the ultimate demonstration of holiness applied to tangible reality, because even the most physical level of existence, the ground we walk on, the land itself, cries out holiness. The process of observing the cycle of the sabbatical year reveals that the material is spiritual. And here's the deepest thing. Rashi essentially is saying, why was the sabbatical year used by the Torah as the example that all the commandments were given at Mount Sinai? Sinai is mentioned specifically in regarding to the sabbatical and jubilee cycle because entering God's chosen land to live an upright life, striving to obey His commandments, this extends the Sinai experience and transmutes it into permanent reality. To live in the land and observe its rest cycle is to perpetuate the Sinai thunder that resounds with the sound of God proclaiming, I am the Creator. There's no greater sign of his presence and connection with his people than the nation's living reverence for his land. The sabbatical year is called Shemitah, which comes from the word for refraining, holding back. During Shemitah, the individual does not work his land nor gather his crop to sustain his existence. And when he refrains from planting and pruning, and he does not harvest the fruit which grew of itself and does not bring it into his home, the land is stamped ownerless, or rather owned by Hashem. And for a full year, Israel declares that she is not the master of her own land. This is a year-long act of homage performed by the whole nation, and every field and orchard, every garden and meadow, every fruit, every blade of grass proclaims that God is the owner of the land. Observing the sabbatical year, refraining from working the land, deepens our belief and sharpens our recognition that it's Hashem who owns his land. We're only sojourners, like guests passing through. Through all its intricate and detailed laws and practices, the sabbatical year reveals that the land, like all of existence, is God's, and man is not in control. The produce is free to all because it's no longer the property of the individual. It's forbidden to work the land because it isn't his. And it becomes clear that the blessing of one's yearly produce is not because, as we are warned against saying by the verse in Deuteronomy chapter 8, not because my strength and the might of my hand made me all this wealth, but it was gifted by Hashem. This understanding that Hashem is the owner of all, that all the individual's possessions are Hashem's alone, is the basis for a healthy society's economic equality as well. And just as the observance of the weekly Shabbat serves as an acknowledgement of God as creator and master of the world, the seventh year, sabbatical year, is an acknowledgement of God as the owner and master. Regarding Shabbat, Exodus chapter 35 and verse 2 reads, 6 days work shall be done, and the seventh day shall be holy for you, a day of complete rest for Hashem. And regarding Shemitah, Exodus 23:10 tells us, 6 years shall you sow your land and gather in its produce, and in the seventh you shall leave it untended and unharvested. The striking similarity of these verses instructs us that Shabbat and Shemitah both strengthen our belief that Hashem created the world and deepen our realization that Hashem renews the world. In Parashat Emor, we receive the commandment of counting Sfirat HaOmer, 7 complete weeks between Passover and Shavuot. This is a cycle of time that's designed to set us free by preparing us to receive Torah, which truly sets a human being free on the 50th day, on the festival of Shavuot. And throughout these 7 weeks of the Omer, we strive to deepen our acknowledgement of the Creator, to imbue the material with godliness. And in the same way, we count 7 sabbatical year cycles, and in the 50th year, a new illumination of freedom comes into the world, a jubilee year, a year of holiness, a sanctification of time and life and our physical world, a year of the return of all things to their spiritual roots, a reclamation on the personal and national and ultimately universal scale of each man to his family, to his ancestral heritage, and as the verse says, a proclamation of freedom. So open up your heart deeper than ever before. Although this concept of the sabbatical year cycle is unique to the land of Israel, and specifically given to the Jewish people whose connection to the land of Israel is unlike the connection of any people to any land, yet there is a powerful universal lesson here for all people who cherish Hashem's truth. Shemitah, the experience, it jars us, it jolts us, it wakes us up to examine our attitude about who we are in this world and what we are doing in it. We acquire things, we amass possessions, we build homes, we build estates, little or even big empires. We lose ourselves and we indulge, we luxuriate in the fantasy that our house or our land or anything we own is ours. Shemitah arouses us out of this illusion and reminds us that there's only one who is the master of all, who owns everything. That this is Hashem's world, and whatever we have is on loan to us from Him, to be used on the condition that it brings us closer to Him. Thank you for watching, and please remember that it's only your support that enables Jerusalem Lights to continue its outreach of Torah for everyone. Shabbat Shalom.